I guess I'll introduce myself properly. My name's Kat Peterson. I'm the co-founder of a small talent agency in Toronto called Real Six. I've been doing this for almost 10 years. We manage a very small group of talent, but mainly PewDiePie, who eats up most of our time. So I will let the intros flow, but I just want to say, first of all, thank you guys for both volunteering to be on this panel. A lot of people are like, no, thank you. No, thank you.
Yep.
No, thank you. I'm not interested, so thank you.
It's because it's tough, isn't it? It's a tough conversation to have because the changes that require us a whole bunch of liabilities and consequences, and it's just been messy, and it's been a long time coming as well. So I'll do proper introductions. I often forget to tell people who I am. I'm Oscar Clark. I'm Chief Strategy. Sorry, I forgot to change my job title. I'm Chief Executive Officer for Fundamentally Games. We're a living game publisher. We're about to announce our first game shortly. But I'm basically old and wear a hat, and therefore I get to speak on panels and host conferences. I have been working in games for 24 years. I am also advisor for a ad company called Audio Mob, and I have been basically doing all this stuff forever. So I'll pass on.
Thanks. I'm Sisian. I'm coming from Digital Turbine, which now holds Fiber, Ad Colony, Appreciate. I actually come from the Fiber acquisition. I do sales with on the publisher side for mobile monetization, and I also come from Ad Colony. So I've been working with publishers on ad monetization for a little bit over 6 years now.
I didn't say, of course, I was the original evangelist for Unity Ads before it was called Unity Ads as well. So I've been doing rewarded ads since they existed. So
Amazing. I'm going to put Oscar on the spot a little bit. Well, you've been in the industry for a long time, for a minute.
I deserve it.
Right. Can you talk, I'm going to rewind a little bit. I, from the position I'm in, have been relatively unaffected by IDFA changes.
As it should be.
Right. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about life pre-change, what the change meant, and how that sort of unfolded. Because I was looking at it as a reader, so I was just soaking up what the media was telling me. And that was it. But from an industry perspective, from a business perspective, I didn't see a big change.
So what you probably would have seen at some point, maybe only once, so maybe you've forgotten it, you were given the option to opt in. And that's basically all we're talking about. Rather than you would be presented ads and you could choose to say, no, I don't want them, or ignore them, or whatever. You then got an extra layer from Apple saying, do you want to see ads? And that has been profoundly impactful. What it's meant, and there's lots of arguments about it. I personally, I'm not sure I completely agree, but there are arguments that it's the power play of Apple versus Facebook. I'm not sure that's entirely fair, but because there is a genuine privacy direction that was coming anyway. But I have to admit, it does put Apple in a better position than most. But the reason I think it's interesting is because we've seen something, well, the last data I looked, which is quite a while ago, I haven't checked it recently, but something like only about 20% of people actually opted in. So you go from 100% of people who are going to get to see an ad to now 20% of people on an Apple device who are going to get to see the ad. If you are relying on doing tests and analysis of your game based on players on Apple, you've just lost any information about what people are actually doing on average. You have only got the people who said they're willing and actually positively choose to see ads. So you're going to base all your decisions based on the people who said yes. That's the profound problem. With Android, we haven't had that happen yet, although lots of people are fearing that it will happen. I don't know. But what we can see on on Android is, here is everybody who could possibly see an ad unless they opt out. We can see their behavior, we can understand that, and we can act on it. The issue is that we have to separate personally attributable information from, basically performance-based information. And that means we have to change the way we behave as companies, where we actually look at interests, we look at cohorts, and we need to stop trying to basically, well, that's what I'm looking for. It's almost like we've had a restraining order put on us. We shouldn't be stalking players. What we should do is embrace them. Anyway, that's I'm talking too much, so go for it.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that, especially for anyone in the audience who isn't super familiar with the changes with IDFA, so essentially Apple's ATT framework, privacy framework that was rolled out with iOS 14.5. To your point, Oscar, it's not so much who's going to see an ad, it's just how it's targeted towards them. So I guess to your point, I guess like if you're working for a talent agency and you're not seeing that difference, is that because no company is going to stop showing ads, and ads are not going to stop being served. It's just more about the efficiency of those ads. And I don't think that the deprecation of IDFA is necessarily a bad thing. I think like bidding, we've been talking about privacy like it's this big thing that's coming. I think if your profits rely on it, you treat it like a boogeyman, but in the greater society, it is generally a good thing. I think the key difference that we're seeing, at least in the last 2 years, is that in Europe, in LATAM, in Asia, we have seen governments regulate and set the frameworks and set the tone. Whereas with Apple, we have seen not only, the biggest company in the country set the tone and the guidelines, but also their position in the company, in the whole industry, in the ecosystem, does have a conflict. So for me, for example, I remember the mayhem that was coming with GDPR. Like, I think it was like May 26th was that deadline. And then it was like, whoop, nothing, right? And with Apple's framework rollout, not that it wasn't a big impact, but it's not like iOS revenues went to zero. And it's not like iOS campaigns just completely stopped working. It's just we had gotten to a point that was so targeted and so data-driven that it's just like a regression.
Sure. And if I can stop you there for 1 second, because you touched on something really interesting that I think would strike a chord with anybody in here or nerve, and that's that other places, other countries let the government make the choice first. As North Americans, should we have stepped up faster? Like, should we have jumped in faster? Should we be letting companies make decisions like this?
I'm English. I'll let you talk about North America.
I'm American, so I don't know. And North American governments, I think, differ a little bit in their activity. Look, I listened to a lot of the congressional hearings. I think in order for our governments to be able to actually regulate, to protect the consumer, to protect data, and also protect the industries that are generating very real revenues and enabling very real jobs, we would need a body that fully understands the technology. And given
I wasn't sure if you were going to go there. Let's go.
No,
I mean, the cookie regulations are all perfect. We're all so much safer with being trained to click buttons that just pop up regardless.
I mean, I have heard, I think, a congressman question an Apple CEO about Google Maps. So, that kind of sets the tone of where we are with government regulation. Yeah. But outside of that, I mean, take it back to as simple as like the number one request I get from publishers that in the 6 years I've been doing this, I cannot facilitate, is block by App Store category. And the two main stores in North America do not have uniformity across the App Store categories. So what's nice about the Apple ATT framework is that for the first time ever, this entire industry was forced to stop and collaborate and work together. Unfortunately, that was like Apple versus everyone else. But to your point, you were reading all the headlines, and there is a little bit of sensationalization that takes place because that was setting a lot of grounds for this is antitrust. This is going to just take out this entire industry. And it's not. And we saw that even, like, for example, at like Fiber, we have our programmatic exchange, right? It's a marketplace. We just sat with every single DSP and we're like, how do we contextually target? Felt like we like regressed 10 years, but it's like, it is what it is. And, you know, if we asked them 6 months ago, they would never have that conversation, but that was just what was required.
Yeah, and I think that having to shift to contextual targeting has made a shift in terms of ad spend from Apple to Android, inevitably. I think we have seen some impact in terms of revenues for games that are generating revenue through ads in terms of Apple versus Android, but it hasn't been anything like we expected. I think that's
Yeah, we haven't seen like clear nosedives. I mean, look, at the end of it, it's all about efficiency. For DSPs and any networks that are running these campaigns, it's how efficiently they are spending their advertisers' dollar. And for publishers who are now very much those advertisers also, it's about how efficiently are we operating our business and, you know, making sure that we are profitable for every single user that we have. So to your point, yes, spend has moved towards Android. I think the latest number was like 70-30. And historically, the reason that spend was so heavy on iOS is because iOS has English-speaking users and the eCPMs are higher. So it's just about like, how do we make the most money most efficiently?
And that equation's still there. It's just some of the balance numbers have shifted. To your wider point about government regulation, so one thing...
Please tell me about the UK
I've
government.
got so much
Get
amazing.
in there.
Yeah,
Get in
it's
there.
not like we just had the Prime Minister resign after several months when he should have done, but never mind. I'm not getting into that. I'll rant for days. Anyway, the thing I was going to say, we were actually hired by the ICO, that's the Information Commission Office in the UK, and they have a code called the Age Appropriate Design Code, which I'm sure none of you have heard of. If you sell any games to the UK, you could be fined up to 7% of global revenue or 19 million euros, whichever is highest, if you breach it. And you don't know about this regulation, do you? Oh, by the way, it means that you can now no longer assume that your players are over 18. You have to have proof. No one's talked about that. And this is the kind of regulation problem we're dealing with, which is way beyond what the Apple process is talking about. And the reason I mention it in this context is because there are some significant consequences, but it shows that actually, I would argue that the IDFA changes were a defense against some of the potentially more restrictive regulations that's now coming, because Apple needed to make a line in the sand, I would argue, to say, no, we are being responsible about how we're handling data because we're going to be doing these things. The industry has had to respond to that, and I think it's actually put us in a better position to respond to the future regulation issues which we're now facing because of the hangover, I would say, over the kind of Cambridge Analytica style behavior that we saw in the Facebook world. So the positives, though, are, as you said, we're changing to context-based targeting. That's actually really good. Interest-based analysis, fantastic. But I think it's also meaning that we're focusing more on creative and communicating messages, which I think might actually give us, people who were trained in brand marketing like I was, that actually we can have some value to add now. We're not being drowned out by the performance, because performance is so effective. We can actually have ads that are interesting. Sorry, anyway, go.
No, I mean, I would just add to that, you know, no one can clearly say what Apple's intention was. I mean, after the April deadline, they did post 11 job postings for their ads business, and we have seen spend go towards Apple search ads. So if I had any hopes of working for Apple, I think this just made sure that I won't work there. But outside of just like where it came from, I think like it's like a chicken or egg story. I can't fully say any corporation is like doing it for the good of the people. But on the other hand, I do think it's very positive for users to understand the value of their data. And I think that's why we don't see as much pressure from regulatory bodies in North America, because the convenience that we as users have it just is far too high for us to like really sit and care. Like with CCPA, I mean, I thought that would actually kind of make like a difference, because it's like listing all these random companies, including like, you know, none of my friends know who Digital Turbine is. So if they're seeing that in a privacy policy, they should be like concerned, who is this? But the truth of the matter is that they're not. But, you know, moving past like all the damage or whatever it is, like for example, for me as a user, I didn't see any difference. And I was like, wait, why am I not seeing the opt-in? I want to see it. Well, I had limited ad tracking on. And, you know, there is like a small percentage of users that I think that was like iOS 10 or 11 in 2016, 2017, where LAT was actually rolled out, that care about this. So for them, like this is like, okay, great, but you probably already had LAT on. I will say I get a lot of ads for games I already have installed. And it's annoying, but you know, that's kind of like the price that I paid to not have my stuff tracked. And I really just turned it on out of curiosity, but it is like that thing for user experience. So outside of the money portion, there is this very real, you know, publishers are spending finite resources, time, a lot of stress to deliver these incredible game experiences, at least for the gaming publishers. And they have to have ads. I think we're at a point where unless you're like mid-core, hardcore, IAP only doesn't really, you know, work.
Even if you're mid-core, if the ads are done well, it can still work, you know, so.
Yeah, but like, you know, we've shifted at least for me, I used to get so much more pushback from publishers for ads. Product teams, games teams still push back, but there are very secure business teams now that are like, we have to run it. Like we have to run the ads because outside of revenues, there's also this natural break that users want in their experience.
Sure. I want to touch on something that's a bit off script, but both of you have touched on informing the users, talking to audiences about these changes. How are we going to do this? I do think there's a responsibility on the industry to get as much information out there to really inform the user about privacy, about data. So where is that going to come from? How is it going to start? And how are we actually going to inform users so that people wake up a little bit and understand the value of their own data?
Yeah, I think this is hugely difficult because we have to tell the users, and we do tell the users, it's in our terms and conditions, it's in our privacy policy, which everyone reads, obviously. You know, you all read every page, don't you? I mean, you scour it and underline the bits that you need to think and go and research. Obviously, you do that. No, I mean, obviously, that's nonsense. I think the problem is that we need to communicate our trustworthiness as businesses. We need to engage with our players authentically where they are, not necessarily in our links and documentation. So I think a lot of it is about being able to build brands that are trustworthy, because that's what a brand is for. It's to say, you can trust me, look at what I'm doing, and I will talk to you, and you ask me questions, and here's all our information, and we're transparent. Transparency is the key, I think, because if we start going off and talking about how our privacy policy works, we start hearing snores. But if we say, oh look, you know, we only collect data in order to improve the game, no one's going to have that. Underlyingly, that says everything. I'm personally, and we say this all the time, I don't want personal information about individuals anyway, except to the very limited the extent I have to have, so I can assign to you the things that you have chosen to buy in the game. I don't want anything else. But I do want to assign you to a cohort, a group of people, which is probably based on your progression in the game, how many days since you've purchased that game, that kind of information. Why? Because if I have groups of people and I can see average behavior with these common characteristics, I actually get better games. That's why I want the data. That's the kind of data I want. I don't want to stalk you. I don't want to know where you live. I don't want to know what your bra size is. I don't want to know what your hat size is. None of that is of my interest, or I have no right, care. I shouldn't even be asking those questions. But what I should be able to do is say, when you play this game, what do you actually do, and how can I make it better for you? And that applies to the ads I present, it applies to the revenue models I use, it applies to the gameplay I do.
I would just also add to Oscar's point. It's really interesting the way messaging and positioning impacts it, right? Because now you hear people like, oh no, I don't want to be tracked. And, Apple has really positioned this framework all about privacy. And I saw this like really funny ad where it was like, your barista shouldn't know about your rash. And I'm like, I don't need to know about your rash to serve you a Playrix ad. Like, I just literally need to know if you're in the States. Like, and, I would say, let's talk about gaming because it is majority of the dollars. There is a lot of valuable real estate. And there is this generational divide, but if we just take mobile-first games and mobile-first companies, they are pulling younger audiences that are savvy enough to understand the value exchange. So I find it really ironic that, sometimes people are like, oh yeah, I talk about an item by my phone because I know Instagram will serve me the ad. So how is that helpful? But it's not helpful when it's in a game. And then on the other end, server cost is very real. I don't want unnecessary information about users. Publishers do not want unnecessary information. We just basically want whatever the algorithm can feed it, which isn't even really truly identifiable. Like, I can't say this is so-and-so who lives at so-and-so address, X, Y, and Z. So really educating the users behind like what's going on. And not just like, hey, we support this game with ads. I think that's becoming too trite. But like truly being like, hey, like if you opt in, like you will get more targeted ads, but that would just make like a better experience. And also, again, like the game is free. My boss and I were joking about, we tell people like, oh, we're the ones who put ads on your phones. But it's like the other way to view that is we're the ones who make your apps free. So really highlighting the value exchange there.
But to that point, I think it's interesting because we were getting these, in fact, we still do get, so to a certain extent, I'm looking at a page and then I go to another page and suddenly I see an ad for the thing I was looking at before and I feel creeped out. And that does happen. But at the same time, in fact, actually what creeps me out about it is not that it exists. It's not useful to me because I've already rejected that thing because I've gone on to another page. So you're actually showing me a less useful ad than if it had been random. And I think that's what, not only am I creeped out, but you're actually being less useful to me. So it's the worst of all possible worlds when it's done badly, like I think in most cases. But I think more to that, there's other areas which I think we could probably get into in terms of the impact post IDFA. And I'd like to talk about like Facebook type tracking. So I use Facebook targeting for my testing. So when we do a lot of pre-testing to make sure games are ready to go live. So I need to be able to spend as little as possible to be able to know if this game's going to be any good. So I need to be able to target people effectively to be able to give them, would you like this kind of game? Of course, I can't do that for Apple devices to any level of extent as I could. I can still do it for Android.
So not at all. You can't.
Well, it's just
like, can you talk? I mean,
you can.
know because you're
Yeah.
in it, but
Yeah.
I don't know. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm probably being a bit unfair saying you can't do it. You can do it, but the scope of the people you can target is significantly reduced, and therefore the cost of targeting those people is slightly higher. In fact, actually quite a bit higher. So I used to be able to get, well, again, it depends on the game, but where I might say get 50p for an install, I'm probably getting more like 75p. Where I used to get £1 for an install, I'm probably getting about 140. It's that kind of. I'm not talking specifically on Apple. I'm actually also seeing slightly higher on Android as well, but that's I think because we're seeing more money being spent on Android, and therefore I'm competing more, even though I'm competing at the very low level, deliberately so, and therefore there's plenty of space for the leftovers, which as I like to describe it, because I'm not competing with King to get players. It means that I can get more effective data about the likability or the attractiveness of the game with these low spends.
Yeah, I think on the Android side, it's just simple supply demand. But I also think when we talk about the deprecation of IDFA, kind of focusing it a little bit, back to gaming. So between the formats of just display like banners, MRECs, and full screen like interstitials and rewarded video, we do see very different types of advertisers. So to your point, when you're testing for a game, it's full screen ads, and you are tracking KPIs. On the brand side and on the banner side, it's brands running, and they're running the way they run on TV, where they just want as many eyeballs. Like obviously, like CTR is a factor, but not as much when it comes to like a rewarded video playable ad. That, the ECPMs for publishers go really, really high. What's been nice is I've definitely seen a pretty quick shift from publishers to be open to more testing. I've heard publishers be open to adding banners to apps that I never ever thought I would hear.
The horror.
Offer wall. I know, that format kind of gets eye rolls, but we've definitely
That's a chill down my spine.
we've definitely seen publishers be interested in that, as well as advertisers, and also go back to being comfortable with making decisions with not as much data. And I do think there is a little bit of overconfidence of like, oh, I did this A/B testing and this is the answer, because there are so many moving pieces in mobile, and every single partner you work with gives such different levels of granularity of data that there was almost like paralysis by analysis going on, whereas now it's just like a little looser of like, okay, what's our goal, right? Like we don't want to hurt retention, we don't want to obviously increase churn, but we want to up our revenues. Can we do it with this new format or this new partner?
But it's also, I think, it's valuing reach, which I think the performance side slightly, you could argue, devalued that. So what I mean by that is that, in the old days where, say, for example, I might want to put an ad in SFX with Dave over there, I had to go to, the team that, he was editing it, and I was going to his ad guy, and I would be buying a page. I would be looking for how many people are going to be buying that magazine physically, and that's the metric I'd be using to see whether I'm going to choose SFX or what was the other one? It was a... No, yeah, right. There were a Total Film or whatever it was that the other mag I used at the time. Anyway, those kind of things, I was specifically making a brand-based decision because I wanted reach for my IP. I wanted eyeballs, like your CPM stuff you were talking about earlier. But when I talk about performance ads, it's the conversion, it's the specific, it's the, how many. In fact, it's not just a conversion. I'm actually also interested in tracking, the behavior of the cohort that came in, through attribution. I want to know not only did I get them to convert, but how long, what proportion of them stayed, what proportion of them spent. So I'm going so many nested layers in the traditional performance stuff. I say traditional because it's kind of gone now, but not gone. That's not fair. It's less easy to do this kind of level of detail because we have to be a little bit more careful about the privacy data. So I think this is the balancing act, which I suspect you're talking about, and I'm misinterpreting, but it's this balancing act where it's shifted from being all about the precise, specific moment, and now starting to take into account actually the fact that we put our brand in front of somebody, whether they click or not, can still have value. And actually, I think that's a positive. I think that's a really good thing, because we start looking at ads holistically, not just from does it give us the very thing we want today.
Yeah, and in regards to going for reach or conversions, obviously for brands, they have to go for a reach, because I think we underestimate just how difficult it is to convert sales. So it's kind of like you cast a wide net, and a small percentage of them will turn into actual revenue. The part that's different for publishers on mobile is that when your revenue is predominantly coming from ads, you don't have these really easy calculations, right? Like IAP is easier for publishers. First of all, it's first party data. It's cash coming from one or two partners, and you can back that out of like, I have this many users, they make me this much money. With ads, you're reliant on what the market and what your partner's technology will give you in terms of value for that. So, again, like, to avoid these extremes, it's not that if you advertise on iOS today, the users that you acquire won't bring you value. It's just that we had so much data before where we were able to look at day 0, day 7, day 14, day 30. And it's just a shift in perspective. Extending those retention ranges that we look at, because it is still the same LTV. And obviously, we want to make sure that if you're paying $1 for this user, you're making more than that dollar. But there are ways to run tests and, fine tune the averages as much as you can. And what's been really helpful is in the last 2 years, we've seen monetization and growth teams kind of turn into one team, because they feed into each other.
That is
I was
actually
just
a
gonna,
hugely
that's the
brilliant
positive.
point. Yeah.
That is the positive that's come out of all of this. So neither of you have a crystal ball, but we don't know. We
I
think,
have a time machine, it's fine.
right, this is going to happen with Android at some point in the near future, right? No? Maybe?
I mean, it's where, it's definitely going to happen. I would just say with Google, they're really learning from Apple and taking we're going to get feedback from developers and really hear. And also, Google has a huge horse in this race. So they can't really afford to have advertisers completely fall off their platform.
True story. We
I
4
think-
minutes left.
I think that's a hugely important point. But what I hope, we've seen too many cases where Google have just, Apple did it, therefore we must. I hope we don't see that again. What I do hope we do is actually to authentically respond to the problem being people don't like feeling stalked, and we have to be responsible with the data that we've got.
Right.
And as long as that's followed through, yes, there will be change. This is always going to evolve. I think
Sure.
this industry changes every 3 months. I mean, as far as I can tell, but it comes around in cycles. So I think we're in this situation where, to your point, just because we don't know that those players are going to do certain things, we still see the sales. So that's why I think hybrid monetization is such an important factor. I think it's almost like we're kind of juggling with big, thick gloves on, whereas we used to be able to just push the balls around.
Yeah, no, that's 3 minutes. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Should we just let's run the mic to you?
Sure.
Hang on. That's the trouble with being a host and a panelist.
Great panel. I just had a quick question. So what are some of the publishers
Oh,
who...
so that was Mike. Sorry, I'm not too sure which mic that is. That's not mic 4.
Okay. I was going to say, what are some of the publishers who have been... how have some publishers, successfully mitigated some of the impact of, IDFA? Or how have they kind of succeeded post-IDFA on iOS?
On the monetization side, I would say working with partners who, one, really stepped up in the summer of 2020 to provide guidance and to work with everyone in the ecosystem to drive those results. So I don't want to be biased, but I personally saw really strong performance in our marketplace because we worked with the DSPs to support the contextual signals that they needed to run. Obviously, those were lower ECPMs, but we did see pretty strong revenues that didn't completely offset all of the impact, but definitely mitigated some of that. And in terms of, obviously I don't work on the growth side, but I have seen a bigger shift and heard success stories of publishers going to influencer marketing and really establishing their publisher name as a brand. So, within these gaming communities, there's a lot of engagement, and, with Web3 and metaverse, there's just like a general shift in our digital society towards communities. So working with influencers that talk about the games, because that's just like more a broader way of acquiring users. Obviously, in terms of like measuring the costs and the impact is pretty difficult, but you're going into an avenue that you don't have like a gazillion people competing with you for the very finite inventory that's there.
Does anyone else have anything before we wrap up? All right.
I mean, so do you recommend that, people looking to kind of get their game out there, that they should, at this stage before potentially Android makes changes to their store, should be altering the way that they plan to kind of get this data and market things? Should they, as you say, like be switching more, like putting more money towards influencer marketing and testing rather than still relying on the existing processes?
Honestly, it's a really hard question to answer because it also very much depends on genre and the market you're operating in and just what your company needs are at that time. But I will just say that looking at data differently as well, and this is where it's very important to work with partners that do believe in transparency. So historically, network partners haven't been as big on sharing some data about like advertisers and things of that sort, but reach out to your partners, ask them for if there's any additional data and get creative with it. And also, this is where creatives become really important in growth strategies. So if you can't use specific metrics across the different channels, test different creatives across the different channels and see what kind of results you're getting. Because with the probabilistic, like with the fingerprinting essentially, there is a bias that the largest channels will get the best quality users attributed to them. So it's a little bit too blanket. So kind of creating some of those differences within whatever you can control, whether it's like creatives or, I don't know, yeah.
And I'd say, I think that in many ways, the stuff that we should be doing anyway, i.e. making sure our creative is on point, making sure that we can get someone's attention within the first 3 seconds, that we can give them a reason to act, that they understand what the thing that you're trying to promote is. All of that stuff is really important, because otherwise what players do is just turn the phone over. So we need to do that anyway, regardless of all these changes. We need to actually pay more attention, respect to the player, and actually give them things that they care about, which is what we need to do anyway. So yes, there are changes, yes, there are impacts, and we take them on the chin. That is the natural business of making games. That's a business of dealing in a highly, fast-moving, ever-changing world. We have to be adaptive, we have to be liquid, we have to actually just care about players.
This was good. Thank you, both. Again, so what I've heard across the board in every panel that I've listened to and sat on is, and I'm comparing this year over year to different conferences, is that people are really starting to consider putting the player first. And I think that's exciting. I think it's a good thing. I mean,
About time.
well, I mean, but these things shift, and with sweeping changes,
To be honest, I think we have for a long time. It's just that we forget sometimes to say the words. We forget to say find the fun. We're an industry about finding fun, and we're so assumed that that's the case.
Yes.
We sometimes forget to remind ourselves, and I think it's worth doing that.
Anyway, thank you both.